So thank you for making time to kind of come today. I appreciate this is the last of your days of this year. And this session that we're going to be talking about today is understanding distress in neonatal care. So kind of what it looks like, where it comes from, and how we can respond in ways that are psychologically informed and compassionate. So we're not just going to be thinking about parents, but also about the babies and you as staff too, because distress does not exist in isolation. It moves through systems and relationships. So some of what we might talk about might fit with you, what you do already instinctively. But my hope today is that it gives you a bit of a framework and a language that perhaps gives you some new ways of kind of thinking. So these are very broad aims and hopes for today. We're going to start by firstly just acknowledging that the neonatal admission, it really is a journey like no other. Even when families have had time to prepare, the lived reality is often very different from what they imagined. So we'll spend some time grounding ourselves in the experience of parents and families, stepping back really from the task and outcomes to ask, what does this actually feel like for them? Because how care is experienced has a huge impact on how people cope, how they communicate, and how they relate to us. We're then going to look at some kind of the key challenges for babies, families, and staff, including a brief focus on psychological trauma, which is so relevant in neonatal care. And finally, we're just going to move on to support. So thinking about what generally actually helps people when they're distressed and overwhelmed. So this isn't, my hope, it's not adding to your workload, but thinking about what you do already and how we can do that in a more psychologically informed way to reduce threat and to kind of create a sense of safety. So I'm going to skip this in the essence of time and trying to kind of condense this. But I think sometimes I just want to say that it can be really helpful when we're entering into any kind of situation, whether that's learning or whether that's a conversation with the family, to check in with ourselves first. So maybe what you could do, and I won't necessarily kind of be able to see that in the chat, but the idea here is, how are you landing today? Where are you landing? This is the 17th of December. Recognize that people are going to be in quite different kind of spaces. Busyness is kind of exploded, particularly when you've got young children at school. So maybe if you feel able to, maybe just pop in the chat, and I can always look at these kind of later, but you guys can all see it. So how are you landing today? So the idea is just to kind of pick a picture and just to kind of see which resonates with you, and just to kind of note that down. Okay.
I can see the chat, Jacinta. We've got a 3 so far.
You got a 3. So someone's coming feeling quite like, oh my gosh, there's lots. Someone's a bit sheepish and a bit shy.
2s and 7s are winning it. We've got an 8.
Okay, great. Okay, so we've got someone here that's still a bit kind of enthusiastic.
Oh, we had a 5, but she's now a 9. Excellent.
That's quite a big oscillating contrast, but we'll take it. I'll absolutely take it. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so before we go any further, I just want to take a moment just to think about how we work and think together today and how we can make this space feel safe as possible for everyone. So we're going to be talking about experiences that can be emotionally resonant, both professionally and personally. So some of what we discuss may connect with you, your own experiences of care, your own experiences of loss or distress. So it's important that we approach it with care and respect. So when we're all having chats, I would encourage you to have cameras on. What we're talking about is inherently relational. The work that we do is relational, and actually we can only really do that when we're present with each other. So obviously when I'm talking, I can't see you anyway, but when we come to the chat, I would really appreciate that. That would be really helpful. And where possible, anything that's shared stays here. Confidentiality is really important to me, especially when people choose to share personal clinical experiences. I will encourage participation, but only to the extent that feels right for you. So everyone will have different perspectives. All of those are very welcome here. And there's no expectation to agree with everything that we kind of covered today. The invitation really is simply to be open to perhaps thinking about things in a slightly different way, or maybe through a different lens. And finally, just take care of yourself during the session. So if you need to step out to ground yourself or pause, that's okay. I think looking after ourselves is part of what allows us to do this work well. Okay. Now, so this teaching really builds on the modules that you've all been asked to complete, modules that we're hoping actually all neonatal staff will do as part of their inductions to the units. And I appreciate that not everyone here might have had that opportunity to do that. But if you haven't, I would strongly recommend that you look at it. I've put just the image of that there, and there's a link. So these will be circulated around. There's 4 modules, and they're actually just a really lovely introduction into how we think about babies, how we think about families, and how we think about you as staff within the neonatal space. Okay, so I'm going to show you a short clip from the Tiny Live series. It's just under 5 minutes. I will say there's lots of thick accents and people are wearing masks, so just as a kind of a warning. But before we watch it, what I'd like you to do is really watch it. This is an environment that you see every day, but this clip really captures many of the themes that we'll be exploring today session. So as you watch it, you might gently hold a few things in mind. So the parent's experience, the baby's experience, moments of threat and safeness, and how parents' roles and relationships show up. You don't need to analyze anything, but just to notice what stands out for you. I'm just going to come out of my thing, and this is where I'm going to ask you to put your cameras on if you feel able to. I'd really encourage you to, because I guess I just wanted your thoughts and reflections on what you saw. Maybe if we start with the kind of the parents' experience. What resonated or connected with you?
I always I don't know if it's because I'm sorry I haven't got my camera on. I totally forgot to bring it with me. Um, I always find it really dynamic, especially from like because they're experiencing the same thing, but they're experiencing things in sometimes totally different ways. Like as a mum and as a dad, I sometimes always tend to find, especially on the dad side of things. They always, because that dad kind of had it a little bit. Like, it's almost like they go a little bit glazed eyes and kind
Yeah,
of, you can see the shock is just there.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's,
He
yeah,
did
it's
look
just so
shocked, didn't he?
stressful, but sometimes for different reasons as well.
Absolutely. And how emotions show up with different people and
Yeah.
through their different capturing of those experiences. Absolutely. Thank you, Ben. That's really helpful. What else? What else do people notice, connect with?
It's like when mom came for the first time to IT to see the baby, she started like crying after seeing the baby. It was like emotional burst. Like she might be thinking that baby was supposed to be inside her womb, and is very small baby, and everything was explained, like told to mom that weight is very less compared to his gestation age. And so there are a lot of questions is like things were going in mom's mind, like what how the baby will be survive, or it was
Yeah.
good if he would be inside me. So there are like so many things comes and in mind, like how the outcomes would be.
No, thank you, Agnes.
This so
That's really
yeah,
important to notice, because we see babies like this all of the time, don't we? We see
yeah,
babies with tubes and that small. And I think sometimes we forget that kind of what that looks like when you first see it for the
yeah,
first time.
Mm.
And the shock.
For a lot of parents must be really difficult that medical environment because maybe they've never ever seen that before, and seeing their newborn baby that is small or premature or just being born on time but unwell must be really shocking. Hearing all the monitors, people, doctors and nurses around, and just that environment must be really stressful. That, as you said, we do that every day. For us, it's a nature, it's a normal thing to come to work and do what we do. But for them, maybe they've seen it first time. Um, I was doing once BFI interview with parents, and they said, we pass this hospital every day to work, and we never, ever, ever in our life knew that you guys existed and you do what you do in here. We were shocked like the first time when we arrived, like, wow, that's actually in here. So,
Yeah,
and
and
I
it's
never
happening day to
realized
day.
actually, yeah, parents don't know that we do exist actually. And these things happen. So being in there kind of, what's happening to them is, yeah, it's hard.
And I think it can be really important just to remind ourselves of that.
Yeah.
I've been in neonatal care now for 13 years, and I still have to hold that, because what becomes my norm isn't normal. And I need to remind myself of that, so that I can really connect with parents and their first experiences of this space. What about the baby? What do people notice about the baby's experience here? what might be if we were to give voice to the baby?
Might be like a baby. So, from my point of view, the baby should be inside womb, and now he's without support of her mom for everything, and he need to get adapted or adopt all the uh worldly things like what we do physically for ourselves for feeding. He doesn't know how to breathe because this baby's lungs are so premature. They don't know how to breathe, and like physiology and anatomy is totally different from the term baby. So it's very hard for the baby. They are, for me, I always say they are fighters, they are warriors. They're fighting for their life to get
Yeah,
stabilized, to
brilliant.
get optimized for their gestation age and grow and tolerate everything. So it's very hard for them. It's for like being an adult can say everything. What do you mean? They can say, they
Yeah,
can
we
express
speak the
everything.
words, we
Yeah,
voice, don't we? And so
yeah,
sometimes we have to mentalize and put ourselves
yeah.
in the shoes of the baby, because as you said,
And
absolutely right. This baby was in a comfort of the womb environment, which was absolutely made for to grow that baby in, and suddenly they're not there
suddenly they
anymore.
are out. Yeah.
They're covered in wires and tube and having needles put into them and all of those kind of painful procedures. And I think it can be really hard to think about that, particularly when you're the person having to do that. And I say that not being the person that has to prod babies and do things for that. But I think there is something really important about kind of how do we hold that in mind to some extent? How do we hold that in the mind of the context of the relationship with the parent and with us as well?
Do you know what I always, sorry to interrupt, I always think of, I don't know if everyone's done the same trait. I don't know if it's like a standard thing with the BFI training, but I remember when I did my BFI training, there was a really good video, and it's the whole glass jar with the different colored beads and stress levels of the babies. And when, obviously, especially babies that prem as well, and when even doing like the simplest of things, you're filling the jar with all that stress. And then it's just, I like to imagine it like that, and obviously be mindful of like how we're doing things, how we're supporting the parents and everything, so that we're not, it's very hard not to, but overload with stress.
Absolutely, and we're doing this to keep babies alive, aren't we? That's the job of being in a neonatal unit, is to do what we can, and there's recognizing that that is part and parcel of that thing. But what can we do to buffer that? What can we do to support that? And we could do a whole other session on infant mental health and how we do that. But it's all part and parcel of that kind of process of thinking about families and infants within this context. Okay, there's so much more I feel like I want to chat with you about. So thank you so much for your contribution. I'm going to come back to the presentation now, just in this in the spirit of kind of keeping to time. I didn't realise I had another presentation open, but there we go. So let's have a look. I'm not sure what's going to happen to it. Whether it takes me right back to the beginning. That's annoying. Let's just go with it though. Oh, it didn't. Fantastic. Yes. Okay. So, what can you see? Can someone tell me what you can see?
Yeah, we can see it in slideshow. We've just got your
Okay.
little menu on it.
Has it got presenter view on it, or
No, we've got the proper view.
Okay, yeah, I'm trying to get my notes up so I keep to time. There we go. I think that's it.
Yeah,
I do like to
look good. Yeah.
So fab. I often come back to this quote from Heinen and Hall because I think it captures something essential about neonatal work. They describe neonatal units akin to trauma centres for all involved. So fragile babies struggle to survive and grow. Parents and families worry constantly while trying to maintain optimism and hope. Staff attempt to avoid burnouts while both encouraging distraught parents and acknowledging the times of poor prognosis. Distress is the companion of everyone. But I will also say distress is not a failure of care. It is part and parcel of the landscape for parents, for babies, and for us as staff. And there's something here about how we go on to kind of support that. So I was going to do this as a bit of an exercise, but I am just instead going to just chat through it just so that we can make sure we get through to the end signs. If we think about the key challenges for babies, parents and staff, you've already named some of this already, but babies on the whole are they're born too soon, or they're born sick, and that's why they're with us. There is a huge amount of sensory vulnerabilities. There's multiple interventions, pain and risk to life. There's separation, from parents, having to kind of adapt and cope with multiple kind of caregivers, and at times isolation when they can't be there, and maybe you're split across a number of different babies. And these experiences, we think a little bit about babies depend on parents who might also themselves be frightened and overwhelmed. And these early experiences matter. They really matter for regulation, for development, and for attachment. And then if we think a little bit about kind of parents and families, parents are often coping with trauma, anxiety, depression, alongside an interrupted transition to kind of parenthood. Many describe feeling like visitors rather than parents, particularly early on. And they're witnessing lots of invasive procedures, fluctuations, potential loss, and being asked to make quite complex decisions under extreme stress. And at the same time, life outside the unit continues, siblings, work, finances, travel, often very little space to process kind of what's happening. And then thinking about kind of staff, you guys. For staff, we know there's a cumulative emotional exposure, vicarious trauma, so witnessing trauma in others, burnout, moral distress are common, particularly in pressurized environments. There may be kind of grief when a baby dies, We're living in a world now where there's lots of fear of litigation, and also then limited opportunity to process the emotional impact of the work while continuing to kind of care for others. And I think when we bring this together and we step back, what becomes clear is that there are multiple nervous systems under strain that are interacting in the same space. A distressed baby affects parents, a distressed parent affects the baby, and staff are right in the middle of that dynamic, really holding care, risk and emotion at the same time. And I think holding this context is really important as we move on to thinking just about kind of distress and how we might support that. So a neonatal journey is often described by parents as a journey like no other, and that really kind of captures something important, I think. For many families, admission comes suddenly and unexpectedly. So even if there's been sometimes to kind of prepare, parents often say that they feel emotionally unprepared for the reality of actually what neonatal care involves. And I think from the very beginning, experiences are often kind of characterized by that shock. We saw that in that mother's face, didn't we? At fear, lots of uncertainty. They're trying to kind of take in complex information at a time when they're just exhausted, they're frightened, and they're still recovering from birth. And there's that constant sense of not knowing what will happen next, both in terms of kind of the short-term concerns that they might have about survival, but how they sit alongside those longer-term worries that someone mentioned about development, disability in the future. And I think parents are often navigating quite unfamiliar environments, an environment that has its own language, its routines, its hierarchies. And they're doing that in the context of trying to build relationships with staff that they depend on and needing to build trust in. And I think what we often sometimes don't pay enough attention to is that parents will be bringing their own histories, their own losses, their support networks and vulnerabilities with them. So previous experiences of trauma, adversity, mental health difficulties can really shape how that journey is experienced for families. And I think when we take this together, it helps us to understand why neonatal care can feel quite overwhelming and disorientating, and why distress is such a common and understandable response for families. So if we think about that as the kind of overarching kind of experience, actually when we dig a bit deeper and thinking about actually what's the experience for parents actually day to day, they're often adapting to so many different changes and on so many different levels at the same time. And that's before they might be thinking about the baby's medical needs. So if we think about from a parent perspective, physically, many parents are still recovering from birth, sometimes from quite traumatic or emergency births. They're spending long times in the unit, maybe not sleeping properly, not going up to maternity to get their medication, and they're running on pure adrenaline, particularly in those early periods. But cognitively, they're being asked to learn complete new language, medical terminology, procedures, monitors, alarms, to take in complex information at a time when their brain is really under threat and they're not functioning as well as they could. Relationally, they're having to form new relationships with staff in an environment where they feel dependent, powerless, and often quite frightened. And they're trying to work out who they can trust, how to ask questions, and how they can be heard. And I think emotionally, many parents are managing shock, as I said, grief, trauma, sometimes alongside, relief, hope, and guilt. And these emotions really can sit side by side, and they often change quite rapidly. And whilst they're doing that, they're also trying to negotiate, who am I? What's my role here? Their parenting identity, and how they do that in an intensive care environment. So they're asking themselves, what is my role? What am I allowed to do here? What am I allowed to do in parent? How do I bond and connect with this baby in this space? And again, also, as I mentioned, all of this is happening with life going on outside the unit as well. So other children, work, finances, those kind of other commitments that they have. So it can be really tricky to hold all of that in mind. So it's understandable that they often feel overwhelmed. They repeat themselves, they feel emotional, and they're not taking things in. It's not so much about lack of capacity, it's just that weight of simultaneously adaptation all at the same time. So I think one of the most important things to remember is that people respond to trauma and traumatic situations in very different ways. So some parents appear relatively resilient, others may continue functioning, and you see them kind of cope through their baby's admission and you think, gosh, they're doing really well. That doesn't always mean that their experience hasn't been frightening, and it means that their system has some way found a way to manage in that moment. But others show a more acute response early on, maybe feeling very anxious and overwhelmed initially, but with support, their distress settles over time. And some parents might have more chronic difficulties with high levels of distress that just persist through the admission. And this often reflects kind of that cumulative stress, that ongoing threat, and more often than not, previous trauma, rather than anything about their motivation or resilience. And I think for some parents, difficulties emerge a bit later. They may appear to kind of cope well on the unit, but struggle more at the point of discharge, when that adrenaline maybe has dropped and support maybe reduces a little bit. I think what this reminds us is that coping is not always visible. Someone who seems kind of calm and organised still might be holding a great deal internally. And while someone who also might appear distressed might be showing us that they're just overwhelmed by their system. So I think it's really important here that we just don't judge coping by appearance. It's always important to kind of remain curious, compassionate, and just open to checking in with families, recognizing that distress can show up at different times and in different ways. I think my biggest memory of that was when I was on a unit and there had been a family with us for months, and mum had finally, she was in LDU, and I just was walking past, and this family had never been flagged to me and I never got asked to see them. But I just was having a conversation with another mother in the unit, and I just turned and just said to this mum, how are you doing? And actually everything kind of came out. And it turns out she has real challenges with being in enclosed spaces. And obviously in Oxford, if anyone works there, will know that particularly LDU has no windows or anything. And she was really struggling, but she was struggling in a way that no one noticed. And it was only really in asking that question that we were able to kind of support and help that mother. I know I'm whistling through these, so I'm sorry if that feels a bit rushed. I'm happy to take any questions if people put up their hands, and Lindsay, you can shout out if that happens. I've got a slide here on mental health, but I want to pause briefly here to say something about how we think about mental health and neonatal care. For many of the families we support, they're coping with very unusual and extreme circumstances. So high levels of distress is entirely understandable. We know that we're working with a vulnerable population of parents, and some will come to neonatal care with pre-existing mental health challenges. For others, difficulties are exacerbated by their baby's admission and uncertainty that come with being on the unit. But for some, their difficulties might develop for the first time as a result of their perinatal experience and their baby's time on the unit. We know that research consistently shows that rates of anxiety, OCD type symptoms, depression are much higher in neonatal parents than in parents in healthy term infants, both in the short and the longer term. But rather than seeing these figures as pathology, I think it can be really helpful to understand them as responses to overwhelming and ongoing threat. Of course, some parents will need additional support. And where you do have access to psychological professionals within your units and you have concerns, I think early conversations can be really helpful. And where psychology isn't available, supporting parents to link with their GP or their health visitor can provide important ongoing supports and access as and when they need that. So this is about kind of holding a compassionate understanding of distress while staying really attentive to when further support and signposting might be helpful. And we know that the neonatal environment is inherently traumatic for many people, for babies, as we talked about, for parents and for staff. When we talk about trauma in neonatal care, I think it's really important to kind of recognise that this is often quite different from the way trauma is usually described. It's often described as something that happens and then is over and something you can look back on. But I think for parents in neonatal care, trauma isn't just in the past, it's happening in real time. Parents are living with repeated unpredictable threats. It might be sudden deteriorations, emergency bells, procedures, changing in prognosis. They don't know when it will be safe or when the experience will end, particularly in those early days. And I think questions like when will it be safe or when will this be in the past, they don't always have those answers to hand. We know that the research reflects this with very high rates of trauma and PTSD in neonatal parents compared to parents of healthy term infants. And actually the study in The Lancet in 2021 looked at that particularly and looked at 27.1% of parents had PTSD a year on from their baby's discharge. So trauma can arise at different points. And I think that's probably really important to say that we can think about kind of a traumatic birth from events on the unit, whether that might be a resuscitation, one that might have happened to their baby, but also one that they might have witnessed. It can come from also, though, how information is communicated in moments of crisis. And sometimes in the work that I do in terms of supporting people with trauma, we'll look at hotspots and absolutely certainly that you might have the big events that you might see as traumatic, but it might be how a nurse spoke to me or how that doctor communicated that information as being that really acute episode that they're struggling with. I think it's important to remember that also that parents that have experienced trauma previously may be re-traumatized by neonatal care, and it might reignite some of those kind of challenges that they have. And so I think when we see intense distress, hypervigilance or emotional shutdown, it can often make sense when we understand what's happening with going on in the brain when trauma is present. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as we kind of go on. But first of all, I want to just show you a video of one mother's experience of PTSD following both her children's births and admissions. I'm just going to stop that there and again invite you to turn on your cameras. That's a really difficult watch. And I guess I'm just wondering any reflections that people have on watching that.
It's not easy to watch these like videos, and like you also get involved and dragged in those emotions and feelings of especially mom. I had an experience from my previous workplace. Uh, Mom was left alone on her own. Dad has left her because the baby born very ill, very sick and premature as well. And no support was there. And then she was like asking me what is the outcome of this baby, how he will survive.
Yeah.
It's very difficult time. Like can't express their feelings. Like even I'm a mom, but when you go through all these situations, conditions, it's not that easy unless you has gone all those through like things. Not easy.
Yeah.
And that carries on like every time that the mom what she said, like the birthday is not very easy because that reminds her every time. For every birthday, she will remember those days.
Yeah.
It's not
To use
easy
the words,
to
I'm
forget all
dragged
these
back
things.
there.
Yeah.
Dragged back there every year as a reminder. Yeah. And then the ongoing impact that it
impacts.
has on
And
family.
then with the same thing has happened with the other baby as well. So like she might be thinking like what have if she's have done anything wrong, or like that so many things comes in mind, like it is because of me, or what I'm doing something not good, or I'm not doing what I have to do. So it's very difficult
all
to,
those internal
yeah,
things that often going on for parents that we don't often see unless we kind of have that conversation with them about what they're holding, what they're potential blaming themselves for. And actually, I think there's something about how when we relate and we're able to kind of connect with them, that actually we're able to fully understand maybe the magnitude of what they're holding.
and what
Thank
happens
you,
usually,
Agnes.
like mostly like our environment also very important, like how others treat mom, actually, their relatives, husband, everyone. It's not their fault, actually.
Victoria, your hand is up.
Oh yeah. I was just thinking that specifically listening to one part she said during the delivery that sort of no one was explaining what was going on. And like in my experience, like not having someone talk you through what is like happening and going on around you is way more traumatizing, because you can't sort of fix things together in your head. So literally just sitting down and explaining things just helps them process it a lot more better. So
I would
yeah.
entirely agree with that, Victoria. And all the trauma work that I do with families, there's often a sense of coming down to kind of two key things. There's one about control and there's one around responsibility. And I think there's something about how do they make sense in the moment of that. And I think this is where, good psychological care neonatal units can be really preventative. We can't stop that woman having had the experience that she had, but actually in how we work with families, how we are with families can have a real preventative effect. So they might not have had, you guys don't see people at the point of their delivery. They might have had a really difficult birth, but actually in the work that you do with families, kind of as they're kind of moving through the neonatal system, you have a really important role so that trauma is not compounded on trauma. And that feels like a lot of responsibility. And I don't mean to add that in terms of a pressure, but actually I think there's something here really important here about how we connect with families.
Thank you.
Thanks, Victoria. Anyone else got any reflections before we move on? Okay, I'm going to try and get back onto my screen again. Wish me luck. Sound is on. Share. Let's see what happens. Zoom slideshow. There we go. Is that back up?
Perfect. Yeah, great.
Thank you. So I'm just going to skip over this slide quite quickly, really. But trauma can and does present differently for different people. But for most people, the three key facets that we use to guide a diagnosis of PTSD. So when we're thinking about trauma as an ongoing threat response, this helps us to kind of make sense of what you might notice in parents on the unit. So some parents might experience intrusive memories or images, things that come back into their mind, things when they feel out of control. They might be vivid thoughts. They might present with sudden distress, disturbed sleep, including nightmares. And sometimes families will talk about this. Others cope very much by avoiding. They might find it hard to talk about the birth or certain events. They might avoid certain parts of the unit or the hospital. And if we think a little bit about, you'll all have a story or a family in mind where there's been concerns about parents not visiting. And there are often a whole host of reasons why that might be. But I think there's something really important about understanding that behaviour and understanding what might be going on for the parents. All behaviour is communication. And so I think there's something about just stopping and pausing and thinking, what could this be? Because we know that for many people, particularly the ones I've supported, that avoidance is part of them just coping with trauma. We have seen, and again, this will be very familiar, you see parents that are really hypervigilant, right? Constantly checking their kind of monitors, reacting strongly to alarms or to any changes in their baby's condition, finding it hard to kind of relax or just appearing quite jumpy or irritable. These responses can look quite different on the surface, but they're all expressions of the same thing, kind of a nervous system that is really trying to stay safe in the face of threat. And I think understanding that can help us to respond compassionately rather than with judgment, and to think about how do we reduce threat and increase a sense of safety, even when things feel uncertain. So we're going to shift on to thinking more about what happens in parents when stress is high and how you can support with that. I think this slide always reminds me that we work in a system where each layer contains and supports the next. So in an ideal world, staff are held in an organisation that supports them so that they can work well and support parents and families. And through that support, parents are in a better position to support their babies. I think supporting distress is not just about a one-off intervention. It's about how all of these layers kind of work together to reduce threat and increase safety. The focus today is really on supporting parents, but much of what we will discuss also relates to us too, how we support ourselves as staff, and how we support our colleagues in the work within our teams. So there are a number of different frameworks that can help guide us in this work. One unifying model that was introduced in the e-learning is the PINK model of framework, which brings together a number of different theories and models that develop good psychological care in units. So PINK draws on three main frameworks, which encompass aspects of understanding of relational care and containment. So how humans regulate our emotions whilst relating to and supporting one another. There's something about a willingness to embrace trauma-informed care. We won't have time to think about these specific things today, but also a commitment to kind of creating psychologically informed environments. I think what is fundamental to all of these models and the ways of thinking is relationships and how they support the babies and families we care for and for ourselves. So kind of recognizing without thinking about relationships, our ability to come to work together and deliver good care can be really impacted. So there's so much we can kind of cover today on spending, just thinking about kind of how we support distress in the room. But one place I want to just start with is a way of understanding what's underneath all of the models and principles. You know, as humans, we're wired for connection. We're evolved to live, work and survive in social groups. Our relationships are essential for our well-being, and our emotions play a really important and vital role in helping us to navigate them. Emotions kind of give colour and meaning to our experiences. They tell us what matters and they guide how we respond to the world and to others. Now, Paul Gilbert has a 3 systems model, and it can be a really helpful way of understanding our emotions and how they're organised and influence our behaviour. And we use this as psychologists with our families and helping them to formulate what might be going on for them. Each of these systems has specific hormones and parts of the brain associated with them. And according to this model, we have kind of 3 basic motivational systems that help us to respond to different situations. We have our threat system, the drive system, and a soothe system. So the threat system is like our internal alarm. So its job is to protect us from danger by making us alert to threats. It triggers emotions such as fear, anger, anxiety, disgust, and it's really involved in helping us to survive. So you'll all be familiar with that kind of fight flight kind of response and freeze response. So this is where this is kind of located. So helping us to kind of manage the challenges and threat as it kind of comes up. The drive system is a very different system. It motivates us to seek out resources, achieve goals, and strive for success. It gives rise to emotions like excitement, desire, pleasure. And when we're working towards something important, our values, things that are really important to us, it pushes us to do things like pursue a career, earn rewards, or accomplish personal milestones. And then the third system is our soothing system, which is responsible for helping us to feel calm, safe, and connected to others. It's activated through comforting experiences, warm relationships, and self-compassion. And it's a system that really produces feelings of kind of peace and contentment and emotional safety. And unlike the other two, many people don't develop this system as strongly, especially if they grow up in environments where maybe safety and kindness weren't consistently available. And I think these systems really interact in an important way. Paul talks about the need to kind of recognise how big each of the systems are at any one time, but the importance of trying to readdress and bring balance to that. So when we're soothed by a safe connection with a trusted other, our threat system can be regulated and calmed. And we can see that. We can see that when a parent offers a gentle containment holding to an infant in an incubator to soothe and settle them, or when maybe a frightened parent feels able to kind of just slow their breath in the presence of a member of staff who listens and hears their distress. I think in this way, the safeness and soothe system can really act as a brake on the threat system. We know that when we detect genuine regard and kindness in others, this has a rapid physiological effect on our body and kind of calms our heart rate. So there's something here about how we are and how we relate to families that can be really important. So again, I was going to do this as a bit of an exercise, but I'm just going to whiz through. So if we think a little bit about kind of parents' systems and what they might look like, threat is really quite large, and for all the reasons that we've already kind of talked about. But they're also very driven. So they want to kind of do things for their baby, but it often can feel outside of their family's control. And often it's the reason that overlaps with the threat system is often they're doing things in the service of trying to avoid kind of threat. And we know that sometimes for lots of our families, that soothe system can kind of feel quite blocked and difficult to activate, particularly because they're in the unit and they're not able to kind of maybe access some of the usual ways of kind of calming and regulating that they're maybe separated from families or not seeing their family as much as they want. So actually, if we think about a parent system, this can really help us to kind of recognize where they might be. And whilst I'm talking about this in terms of parents, this also relates to you. So sometimes when I'm doing staff wellbeing sessions or getting staff to think about themselves, we'll often get them to do this for themselves as well. So just maybe in your own mind, take a moment to also think about you. If you were to draw out your circles, how big and how proportionate might they be to one another? So I wanted just to ask some questions. So what I might ask you to do is just maybe to put some stuff in the chat, and Lindsay, if you're happy to maybe shout out rather than me coming in and out of my screen.
Yeah, that's fine.
What might we observe when parents' threat system is activated? So when we're thinking about actually threat is very live and it's very present for them, what might we observe? What behaviors might we see in parents when that's happening? Just pop it in the chat.
Oh, we've got withdrawal, denial, anger, crying.
Yeah. So there's a oscillation there. So there's the withdrawal, a kind of taking ourselves away.
Frustrated.
Yeah, but we're also seeing kind of more overt kind of behaviors of crying and anger.
Ineffective coping, hypervigilance, stressed.
Yeah. Stressed. It's interesting, that kind of notion of kind of ineffective coping, because absolutely we might see that as that. But actually what I often think about is when threat is really present, we don't often have a choice about how we cope. It's often very automatic, and it can be very much dependent on our previous experiences and how we've dealt with stress in the past. And we're going to come to that on the next slide, that actually our ability to choose how to cope is often taken away from us, and we often respond more out of survival. Okay, thank you. I'm going to see, I'll leave it across, come on. So I think it can be really helpful to think about what is happening in our brains and bodies when faced with difficult or distressing information, and sometimes what's happening for all of us. It's a universal response, and it has a real impact on our ability to communicate effectively, both as professionals and as just people. I think understanding what's going on in our bodies and our brains at those times, we can start to really appreciate why, when we're trying to communicate with people, it can feel really difficult. And it can really help us, if we do have that understanding, to guide how we approach these interactions and how we can offer support. We could spend a long time diving into the details of the brain under stress or threat, but instead we're going to just start with a model that tends to resonate with people when I've done some teaching. It's a really simple heuristic model known as the hand model of the brain, developed by Dr. Dan Siegel. Some of you may have heard of him. He's written widely on trauma, but also how the brain responds under threat. And there's a brief explanation. This isn't Dan Siegel, this is John Richardson Love, who talks about what's happening in the body and the brain when stress is present.
Hi, I'm John from Child Savers. I wanted to share with you some information about the brain and how it responds to stress in our lives. If you hold up your hand like this, we can use this as a model of our brain to help us understand it. Here, my wrist and my forearm are my brain stem. Controls heart rate, blood pressure, circulation, what we call your autonomic nervous system. All those things that happen in our body that we don't have to think about but happen automatically. Take your thumb and wrap it in here. My thumb is what we call your downstairs brain. Downstairs brain is really important for a lot of different reasons. When we're talking about stress, my downstairs brain is important for my survival instinct. What I do when I'm getting ready to fight, when I get ready to run, or I get ready to hold really still and wait for the danger to pass. That's my survival instinct down here, how I respond to stress. My upstairs brain, or cortical brain, is here. These are my fingers that wrap over my thumb. And my upstairs brain is important for a lot of different things, including relationship building and problem solving and delayed gratification, thinking about consequences, and even learning is housed here in our upstairs brain. And that's really important because if my survival brain hears a loud noise, then it might get ready to run or get ready to fight. But my upstairs brain can assess that loud noise and stop and think and try to figure out whether it was maybe just a car backfiring or a door slamming or a book falling to the ground. And that's important. When we get impacted by life stress, we flip our lid. And that flipping of the lid puts downstairs brain in charge. Nadine Burke-Harris has a saying that when I'm fighting a bear in the woods, I don't want to be in relationship building brain. I want to be in survival brain because that's what's going to keep me alive. Unfortunately, sometimes we flip our lid for reasons that we don't need to. And that means our relationship building brain is offline. Our thinking about consequences brain is offline. And when we flip our lid, when we're interacting with other people, whether it's a colleague or a coworker or a family member who's flipped their lid, who's in that survival brain, we have to remember that we're talking to that downstairs brain and we have to help them soothe and calm. And only then can we talk about consequences. Only then can we talk about relationships. Only then can we expect a learning experience to happen. So using this way to think about what's going on in our brains during moments of stress and the brains of the people that we love and care about is really a useful way to think about that so we can have effective interactions and help people out in the critical moments of their lives. Thanks so much.
So the key idea here is that when we're faced with threatening or overwhelming information, the brain survival system takes over, which can significantly affect our ability to listen, to process, and to communicate. And I think this model is really helpful because it gives us a way of thinking about where someone, a parent or a professional, might be operating when they're under stress. We might see this if you've got young children, you know, when that red mist kind of comes down, actually there's no point in trying to rationalize and talk to a child in that sense. And actually, although we're adults, actually our brains aren't that different in that respect. Actually, when stress is really, really high, actually our ability to kind of communicate is greatly impacted. I think it's important to say that it's not a one size fits all, but it's just a really useful framework of what's happening in those kind of emotionally intense moments. So I'm just going to skip over that exercise. I think what we know is that the brain operates differently in different states, and also people have different sensitivities to threat or information that they might activate their threat system. So we could break the same news to two different parents and they'll have two different responses. When someone's in a kind of calm state, we're able to kind of engage our cortex, that kind of top brain, upstairs brain, and engage in more reflective and abstract thinking. But as our stress increases, our ability to reflect and think through problems becomes more problematic. And this diagram here on the slide really is just a visual representation of that. Actually, when we think about that kind of scale from calm to terror, actually, when we look about the different brain, the dominant areas of the brain that are used and accessed during those different kind of different states. But I think what's really interesting is, and I take this with a bit of pinch of salt, but right down at the bottom, that kind of functional IQ. So our ability to use our whole brain and to use our kind of intelligence and is impacted. So when we're in a state of kind of fear or terror, actually, we're not using our brain at the full capacity. So we think a little bit about when parents don't fully understand what we're saying, and they need things repeating. It can be really understandable when we look at things from this perspective. We know that some people are more sensitized to a threat response than others, whether they've got a history of adversity, unmet needs, high trauma in their background. We know that they're more likely to dip down this kind of scale much more quickly than others that don't have that experience. And I think what we're aiming to do is to keep people in as much towards a window of tolerance, a state where they can take in what you're saying and being able to engage their thinking brain without too many dips into either being kind of hyper aroused. So that's the things that we see with overwhelmed. So that's the crying and overt distress. And though that hyper arousal, where we might see what you've already named in some of the things in the chat around kind of that withdrawal, that sense of kind of maybe dissociation and not being particularly very present. And I think there's this doing that, it's not a one-off sentence or a technique. It requires, we're quite careful watching and checking in order to during conversations with parents to be able to kind of see where they're at and just check in and ask, does this feel okay? I think distress can look quite differently. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's quiet, and sometimes it's quite withdrawn. And I think you've noticed that in some of the chat comments that came through. And I think when parents are in that threat state, it's often that they can't process what you're saying, even though they're having to kind of make difficult decisions, or you're asking them to think about something. So the challenge is really real here. And so just thinking about that kind of window of tolerance and where they're at, it can be a really helpful anchor. There's a model that I just want to introduce you to in terms of thinking about what helps and how we do this. So Bruce Perry has developed a really simple, as I said, but powerful model to show how to re-engage the thinking brain when a person is stressed and operating in survival mode. So that downstairs brain mode. And it's called the 3 R's framework. And as I said, Bruce Perry, he's a neuroscientist and a psychiatrist, and he calls this model the neurosequential model of engagement, or the 3 R's, as I tend to like to call it. So regulate, relate, and reason. And it's a very practical, trauma-informed way of thinking about how do we engage with others. And it's based on the idea that our brain develops and processes information from the bottom up. So when the lower parts of our brain detects kind of threat, we switch into that survival mode, which means that higher thinking parts of the brain aren't easily accessible. So the model reminds us that before we can reason and think clearly with someone, we first need to regulate them, help them to feel calmer, use our relationship to help them to feel safe and connected with us. And it's only then when they're regulated that they are able to do the much more reasoning thinking that we might need for them. So that's what I want you to hold in mind. And if you take away anything from today, that's what I want you to be thinking about. Actually, if someone's really highly distressed, you're not going to be able to kind of talk to their thinking brain unless you help them to kind of regulate and feel safe in the connection that they have with you. So we're going to think just, I'm conscious of time. So just in thinking about what that looks like in practice. So I think firstly, in terms of regulating this, what do you notice? What is someone presenting with, and how can you might help them to regulate? That might be a pause, a walk, providing space, giving them opportunities to kind of just sit and talk to you if you had the time, or someone with them if you've got family support workers within the team. It might be just acknowledging and offering them a drink, helping them to kind of regulate maybe their kind of breathing. You know, sometimes we might use kind of touch as a way of kind of helping to kind of ground them, whether that's a kind of hand on their arm or on their shoulder. You'll often kind of see this kind of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 kind of grounding techniques. And I think it's become quite ubiquitous in social media. The essence of it is actually, how do we bring someone back into the space, back into the room? And we don't want to do it if they're very distressed in a very unconnected way and saying, tell me 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, because actually that feels a bit jarring to maybe their experiences. But it could be in the conversation, I can see that this is really difficult for you, and I can see that worry is taking you down a particular path. I'm wondering whether we bring ourselves back to the present moment. A helpful way of doing that is maybe just anchoring things that we can see and feel in the moment. Could we do that together? I think it's really important to resist the urge to problem solve here. It just won't work. Their cortex is offline, so you might as well be talking to a brick wall. But how do we support them to feel safer just now? Thinking a little bit about the things that you might want to do. And I think it's only then that we can think about then that relationship, and you can use that relationship to help them to relate. So if you've managed to help them to calm, or just to kind of regulate just a little bit, we can use ourselves as humans to help them feel connected to us, so that they can start, and you can start thinking together. So how do we empathize and attend to them through our words and our body language? How we come across in our body and our words is important, and the ability to be able to kind of sit with that difficult stuff too. It's not necessarily about how you have to fix things in the moment. There is something here really important about just bearing witness, I think, to some of their distress. And sometimes it's like, I don't really have the words, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit here with you. And I think that feels okay. There is a short clip that really kind of summarizes that up. I'm just going to check in with time, though, with Lindsay and Susie to see if I can have a few more minutes.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll just we'll sort coffee out. It's coffee
Are
straight
you
after
sure?
this. Yeah, no, that's fine.
Right. I think this really speaks to, and particularly doctors, it might feel weird I'm showing you a cartoon. It's from the film Inside Out, but I think just really speaks to what we're talking about here.
Oh, the stuffed animal Hall of Fame! My rocket! Wait, Riley and I were still using that rocket. It still has some song power left. Who's your friend who likes to play? No, you can't take my rocket to the top. Riley and I are going to the moon. Riley can't be done with me.
Hey, it's gonna be okay. We can fix this. We just need to get back to headquarters. Which way to the train station?
I had a whole trip planned for us.
Hey, who's ticklish, huh? Here comes the tickle monster. Hey, Bing Bong, look at this. Oh, here's a fun game. You point to the train station and we all go there. Won't that be fun? Come on, let's go to the train station.
I'm sorry they took your rocket. They took something that you loved. It's gone. Forever.
Sadness. Don't make him feel worse.
Sorry.
It's all I had left of Riley.
I bet you and Riley had great adventures.
Oh, they were wonderful. Once we flew back in time. We had breakfast twice that day.
Sadness.
It sounds amazing. I bet Riley liked it.
Oh, she did. We were best friends.
Yeah, it's sad.
I'm okay now. Come on. The train station is this way.
How did you do that?
I don't know. He was sad, so I listened to what...
Hey! There's the train!
Oh, we made it! We're finally gonna get home! No.
Okay. Got a couple more slides after this, but I just want to get some thoughts about what you noticed about the two characters and how they supported Bing Bong in that little short clip. What do people notice? So Joy is the bright yellow character, and Sadness is the blue character.
The second character actually felt the sadness really there. I don't know what the name of that character.
Bing Bong.
Yeah, Bing Bong. So it's like sometimes we need to be feel what they are actually others are feeling at that moment. And it's not every time saying, oh, it's okay. It's not okay every time to say it's okay. We need to understand them.
Yeah.
That's the thing, yeah.
What about Joy? What do people notice about Joy? What was Joy trying to do? Oh, Ren, you're on mute.
Sorry, talking to myself. They kind of felt the opposite way at the start. I think, one wanted to fix it and one was completely down. And obviously they tried to fix it, but feelings were not there at the start, I would say. Yeah. I know the film very well. Watch it with the kids. It's a really good film.
Yeah, it's a brilliant film, and it's based on really psychologically sound.
Bring up the feelings and why we feel that way. Yeah.
So Joy very much wanted to kind of, let's get on, let's come on, and try to fix it, try to make it kind of better, right? And Sadness sat with it. And I think there's often a concern that actually this is going to take too much time. But actually, if we were to really compare those kind of clips together, how did Sadness take much longer to kind of get Bing Bong to that place of where he was able to kind of accept what had happened? And I think this is really important to kind of recognize. I think sometimes we think, oh gosh, it's going to just take too much time, but there's something about just sitting with and connecting with them and not trying to fix, going, you know, recognize this is hard. This is really hard. That can actually just help people to feel seen and heard, and that can be really, really powerful. I think often
I feel like we do that in like small micro ways, but every day. It doesn't always need to be a big long conversation, just not going, you know, just trying to, but they'll parents will quite often say, oh, this was difficult, but then you sometimes feel the urge to go, but at least they've done this. There's just trying to be like, yeah, that is difficult. Just try to integrate it into like everyday conversations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something here around validation, because actually parents are able to hold in mind the whole picture, but sometimes they just need that space to be able to think about the things that are hard, and actually it's really rubbish. I like Brené Brown. Many of you will have heard of her. She's quite ubiquitous around and stuff, but she will often say, she's got this really cool clip, and she says, never does a compassionate sentence begin with "at least." You know, at least they've done this, or, you know, because actually sometimes we just need to sit and be with people in that. And it's in doing that then they can kind of come to the realization that, but yesterday actually it wasn't so hard. Okay. I'm just going to share some last slides, and then I'm done. And I'm sorry, this has been quite a whistle-stop tour. As I said, I thought I had a little bit longer than I had. So I think it's only really then when we've listened and we're present with someone, then we can ask, how can I help? So this is when we turn back to all the skills and the context of connected relationship that we can do. So so once we've kind of helped to kind of regulate with, and that is about kind of recognizing where people are at, what they might need in that moment, we use our human to human connection to kind of help them to kind of connect with us using a range of our tone of voice, our eye contact, their expression, body language, really being present with them. It's only then that we can kind of get them to the space of being able to kind of reflect, learn, and then kind of engage with lots of the stuff that we need parents to do within neonatal care. So there's a few slides. I'm going to leave these for you to have a look through in your own time when the slides get kind of circulated, but just some other helpful techniques and things that other parents have told us that can be really helpful when and what they need support with at different kind of times. That you will have a short session on some self-care kind of coming up, or it's usually within the kind of the program. There is a Padlet of resources here, and also some compassionate mind resources as a QR code to think about. And I love this graphic here because I think that this really speaks to the importance of self-care. Actually, we need to be regulated in order to be able to support and regulate someone else. So when their storm meets our calm, co-regulation occurs. And I can't stress that enough in terms of the work that we do together. I've got some additional resources kind of there. So again, I've put the hyperlinks in, so you'll be able to kind of access to them. We won't have time to do that today, but if you have a chance to give any feedback, again, this will be circulated on the slides. I would really appreciate it because it helps us to hone and change the sessions. If you need to contact me, that's my email address, or I'm on LinkedIn, so feel free to contact me there.